Welcome everyone to a special, odd edition of the Social Misfit Sitdown, kind of mixed in with the cynical view of wrestling because we're all here. I'm Jake Starr. I got Wasley and Professor D. Olek is with us as well. Say hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Greetings, salutations.
All right, so Wasley's playing the role of the smartass today, so at least we know who's doing what.
British. I'm British. It's what we do. We condescend.
That is true. So what we're doing here is we're getting back to the way the first interviews I did went, where we're talking e-fetting, but instead of doing what we did before, where we're talking to people about what brought them into the game, why they made their characters, we're talking to someone who's a lot crazier than the rest of us, the people who run the joints. We're going to go talk to the Fed heads themselves, and what better person to start with than the benchmark, the man who is the one everyone aspires to be just like, the guy we all love, and the man who makes SCW the best place around.
Great, I've already got heat by having the entire eFed community now. We're a quiet little joint out of the way. No one bothered us.
But the thing is in all seriousness, and this isn't a knock on the people who are the talent. We're not the ones who make SCW successful. It's Olek and his writing. And I wanted to start kind of getting to know a lot of these Fed heads because way back in the late 90s, I tried doing the same thing and I sucked. And I don't know how people do it, why they subject themselves. And a lot of people are curious about the same thing. So we're hoping to get different Fed heads, but I wanted to start with the great one himself.
The Rock?
So
Do we have The Rock?
No, it's going to be President Rock. Get ready.
Okay. And Vice President Tom Hanks.
Exactly. Yeah,
we're set the show now.
Yes. For those of you who are wondering what day we're recording. So Olek, welcome, my friend.
Thank you. I kind of just was with the furniture. I think it was more you're just like, well, you're here, so.
Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, we want to. Wasley and I, we've been talking, and we want to try and get inside your brain, not about pro wrestling because you've already taken us to the learning tree on that. We want you to Ernie Ladd us with e-fetting, and I want to start it off with a very poignant, straight to the point question. Why do you subject yourself, and why did you decide to actually do this?
Well, the actual answer is not that great. It was more that a friend of mine said, hey, why don't you try e-fetting? And so I tried e-fetting. And then a week later, my friend was like, you can run this place better than anything else. So why don't you start your own? So we went on to MSN chat. I'm dating myself more. And we decided, let's start a Fed. I literally started a SCW a week into playing this game.
You're kidding.
I had literally written my first role play as I was recruiting for my Fed.
Jesus.
And that's why I also say my example is not the best because part of I should note that I started with somebody else who we quickly had very different opinions on how things should be done. And I quickly showed how little knowledge I had of the game. When the first pay-per-view we had, this actually convinced me. Granted, I was 14 years old at the time. So we had found somebody on MSN chat, and he basically created this character named the Terminator. And the Terminator was a 7'11" guy, which first off, I probably should have said, wait a minute. But being 14 years old at the time, I was like, this sounds fantastic. This would be great. I want monster characters. Fantastic. And he was in the initial hardcore division before it was the underground division. And facing somebody who was a friend of mine from high school named Kid Insane. And so they had their match. And of course, the pay-per-view rolls around. And he just sends me a message saying, I'm not going to be role-playing for the match. And I was like, okay, why not? Well, you see, my character's 7'11", so really nobody should be able to beat me. So by default, I should win every match I'm in. And me not realizing, okay, this is not okay, and being 14 years old at the time, said, that sounds like a very logical argument. I'm going to agree to it. So I had him win, despite not role-playing. And my friend was like, you realize you just screwed me? I was like, that's also a good logical argument. I like the cut of your jib. And so promptly I had a rematch, realizing as I was learning on the go what you can and cannot do in the game. Because, of course, unless you run an angle fed, you do not have complete control. And back in 2003, I had the first ever very quick win the title, immediately lost in their first match, and then the rematch on the following show, which was literally the next day, because I had shows every Monday, every Thursday, and pay-per-views on Sunday.
Please tell me you still have some of these shows somewhere.
I do. They are dismally awful. And on top of this, to show my further lack of knowledge, there was never a card. The card would be created on the fly. So I basically booked it like 2000s ECW, where who shows up and who wants a match, and literally people would role play, say, I want to face this person, and I'd make the match. And they would have literally, in some cases, 24 hours to role play.
Wow.
On top of this, there was no deadline. So the deadline was, if you got a role play up before I got the show up, it counted. I would like to think I've learned from this experience, since now we have 1, deadlines, 2, full cards, 3, I'm not a moron. At some point, I became intelligent.
On the bright side, though, I mean, you've learned from your own mistakes.
Yes.
You've not just watched other people make mistakes and put up with bad feds and then thought, fuck it, I'm going to make my own. You've just started right from the beginning thinking, I'm going to do this, and then you've learned from your own mistakes to get to the point you're at now.
Yes. And those first 4, I'm trying to think now, but 5 months, we opened July 31st. There's a 31st in July, I think, 2003. So we almost closed in December, because I had at least, I'm trying to think, because we went to the MSN chat system, so people were like, oh yeah, sure, I'll join, and then never showed up. So we had something like 50 characters that had literally one-offs. In those first 2 months, we had a brand extension a month in, because why do things half-cocked? But also on top of this, as I had a few friends who had some experience, they unfortunately, they came in, and one of them ended up nearly causing the Fed to completely collapse, because they foolishly went to their old Fed and tried to poach talent.
Oh dear.
Not real, and like me, I didn't even know he'd done this until the people from that other Fed showed up on the boards. And basically what they did is every single thread, every single match, they would just, the one person would post the Pokemon rap. They would troll every single thing, so nothing was intelligible. And so I then found out what happened. Fun fact, that's how I ended up meeting Adam. Through that, because he came to me and said, okay, so you're just clearly in over your head. Something happened here. And through that, we actually slowly developed a friendship through the game. But those first 5 months were literally me just going, running a Fed sounds cool. Sure, I'll do it, because I'd always wanted to book wrestling. It was sort of my dream job. I'd love to book wrestling. So it was my way of living vicariously through it. And I learned literally as I went, because the only circle of Feds I knew was me and the handful of people that we had all known. And basically we all just kept building off of each other and learned all at the same time. And I was the only one who lasted at the end, because there can only be one. And I apparently was the Highlander. But like I think about this, I'm trying to think, within the Fed, the circle, there were 4 Feds. And they all tried to we all lived off the same talent. And I was the only one who was consistent enough to make it through. Because I think that's the thing about the early, when you're starting, is generally if you're a pretty decent guy and you realize, okay, you screw up, you'll survive. And then on top of this, are you consistent? Then you build a brand, and then people will actually at least give you the benefit of the doubt. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't learn from their mistakes, or only listen to their friends, or do all the mistakes and never learn. And I think that's sort of the problem. In those first 6 months, like I read back those shows, they're awful. They are awful. But I reset in 2004 and slowly started to actually figure out what I was doing.
Well, here's one question I've always had. What made you brought it up, the difference between the complete control of an angle fed and knowing you like I do, you are a bit of a control freak. So what made you not want to go that route and really have more creative control than you even have now?
One, I don't really understand angle feds, and that's just a personal thing. I've never really tried to understand them. I get that there's sort of a back and forth between people, but ultimately the person who's in charge can sort of have the veto power and all this. But I started in role playing, and so I always just I like that competitive aspect. Because on top of this, while I like control of storylines and I micromanaged quite a bit, to not have all of to not know how it's going to turn out, you don't have to then worry about having the fights of, well, I think I should win this match, or I think I should win this match, especially if both have perfectly good reasons. It's then based off of, I wrote this role play, and it becomes my decision is this. It takes out the two individuals from having a vested interest in how it turns out. At least in terms of, especially if you have two people who don't get along, who don't quite know each other, who don't quite like each other, you don't have to worry about if there's a hatred there. You can insulate that part and just focus on, they're doing their role plays, they're forwarding their own characters. That's what they worry about. I, as the Fed owner and the head booker, can focus on, okay, I have to make sure both have something coming out of this angle, for example. That's a lot easier to control. And I have just, however, taken it to the extreme of, if people don't want to ever send in a segment, they don't have to. I'll figure something out for them. I don't, like, it's again one of those things where I've done it for so long that those feds that do it where everybody submits segments and basically the only thing the Fed owner does is essentially book cards, I can't understand that.
SCW destroyed my ability to tolerate that kind of Fed. It really did, because like when I came to SCW and I saw how much effort you put into segs and giving people stuff to work on, and then I'd have like a bit of spare time, so I'd join a small Fed with a random character that I'd come up with and wanted to test, and I'd have to write my own segments, and I'm thinking, I've just written my role play, like to compete with these other people, or my role plays, depending on how many I'd done, and then I had to come up with my storylines on the show as well, and I'm thinking, well, SCW don't do that. Olek don't make me figure out my direction. And I just realized that SCW has just destroyed my ability in RP Feds to write my own storylines for shows. I just can't do it.
And that's not necessarily a good thing, but
well, it's not. But that just goes back to what Ian was saying at the start, where you've sort of set this benchmark. And if I'm going into an RP Fed and then I see that you have to write your own segments as well, I straight away just close off that page.
And there's sort of two reasons why I've done it, and I support the way I do it. Is one, when I started out, this is when once I sort of got my feet underneath me and got through those really tough first months where I basically gave myself, it's like learning a language without a dictionary. You're just sort of figuring it out as you go. So for those first 6 months, I took my lumps, and how we survived, I don't know, because we ended up actually almost rebooting entirely in 2004. But anyways, once I started to sort of get a handle of it, 2004, 2005 is when I started to realize how self-interested a lot of people are. And for me, it's great if people come up, hey, look, I just came up with a segment. If you can use it, great. If you can't, you can't. A lot of people like, here's my segment, and it would be like them like practically murdering their opponent's wife, like just an over-the-top level of like ridiculousness. And I was getting this where frequently a lot of the segments I were getting were not, here's a promo or this, it's here's this ridiculously over the top angle, or here's this vicious attack that basically sucks all heat out of it. And I kind of realized that at the end of the day, all this will end up leading to is trading segments of people just attacking people. Mm-hmm. And that's one, lazy booking, but two, you're just going to piss people off. And so I just started to say, well, you know what? I kind of said, I'll handle a lot of that, and I'll always have the right to either not use a segment, to change it, to alter it, or to hold it for another week. But then the other thing that sort of has come, and this is sort of just a function of the game of now, this is 13 and a half years, almost 14 years now, that we've all gotten older. When we all started this game, we were what, high school? Yeah, maybe a few of us were older in university, college, whatever type of years, late teens, early 20s. You had a lot more free time. And it's like if I sat there and said now, like, take a look at what I have. One of the issues I have with Breakdown Weekly now is just even finding match writers. And I get match writing is a bit different from segment writing, but at the end of the day, if I can't find 3 match writers, am I going to be able to find a Fed where everyone's going to be able to write a segment, or even just send in one, or half of them will, or a quarter of them will on a regular basis?
No, that's one of the problems that you do have with an angle Fed. Like, I know GCW suffers that on their shows when SCW's got a pay-per-view. So like we have a Saturday deadline, and Saturday deadlines are usually for the GCW angle shows. So their segment submission goes right down, and then you get like JJ having a fit because he's got to somehow fit the small amount of segs that he's got in with all the matches and make a decent show out of it.
And I think that also speaks to another, just a simple other fact of the game, is in 15 years, the player base has dropped dramatically.
Yeah.
Name how many people are in their teens playing this game that you know. Not as many as we did, say, 10 years ago.
I don't know if I can name one.
Well, the thing,
and
one thing I could say, even on the basis of that, is I think it's actually, in a sense, picking back up, but it's an older crowd than it was back then. Because in the before I came back to the game, I was out for 4 years, and it was basically, outside of SCW, it was basically a dying game. And it's like, I've seen a resurgence in it, but it's definitely not that teenage crowd, because I think a lot of that could be because there's not those Yahoo and MSN chat rooms where you can get that younger demographic to actually expose them to it.
Well, and there's that's part of it too. Wrestling is just not as popular as it once was. Let's just be blunt about that. So there's fewer people that are just like, I want to be Triple H. I want to be Stone Cold Steve Austin. There's not that type of mindset, because that's how a lot of us sort of came to the game. Hey, I've always wanted to be a wrestler. This is a way to get around it. Plus, also on top of that, technology has changed to the point where playing a text-based game is sometimes just not as doesn't draw as well. But I think one of the things that's also helped is there was sort of a period there where there are those established feds, and like you had XNet, you had those big multi-feds that at least when they were on the up and up, you had circles of feds that, okay, this one doesn't work, we'll go to this one. Then there was that period where, like I even look at SCW, I got to a point where we were the only fed out of the circle that survived. We had ULW, we had, if it was turned into IWC, there was, I'm blanking, AWF. They just went out of sort of had it, and we had a couple of little sort of interfeds, and basically you ran in your little circle, and occasionally you have that sort of tendril that got out there. So for example, you have like MCW was one that a couple of people had. Some people knew of us through XNet, things like this. But it wasn't until Twitter that one of the good things about Twitter is that it allowed a lot of people to become exposed to different feds, different types of feds. Micro feds are doing huge now. And it's sort of the game has evolved in different ways, but at the same time, you're looking at those sort of those feds that have been around since the dawn of time. Most of them have had a significant hiatus in some way, shape, or form. And that's the thing is that either because of the lack of role playing, the lack of help from a management perspective, or sometimes just the fact is the Fed owner loses interest in the game. People get older, their interests change. And so it's interesting watching things go. Like I look at myself, I still enjoy it for the most part, but how much longer do I realistically have? Because again, depending on what's in my future, I mean, I'm struggling to have the time right now to keep running things to the level I want to. And I'm one of those people I can't do, again, half measures. So again, the game has evolved in weird, sometimes good, sometimes bad ways, but it is seemingly on an uptick, or at least you have people who are willing to give multiple feds a shot, because again, things like microfeds are something that allows them to do so.
Yeah, the amount of feds I've seen just through Twitter that follow me, I think just because I mean just because I'm a character online, and they know that they can, I guess, at least promote themselves to me without having to do like you used to, where you had to like basically sweet talk people. They can just get you to follow them, or follow you and kind of see what you're doing, and if they ever see something that they can kind of pounce on, they'll come after you.
Yeah, well, the old way of doing that was something like MSN chat through friends, like through people in the Fed inviting somebody else that they know. Oh, I ran with this person in this Fed; they might be interested. Or what you usually had was either Rough Cut, where you'd go on there. Okay, who are the free agents? And then you have 28 people all sitting there vying for one person's time. Or you did what a lot of people did in the old days, was you'd sign up on the board, and you had to then politely ask either one, the Fed owner, hey, do you mind if I advertise my Fed, which is one of the proper ways of doing it is because the Fed owner's okay with it in the sense of, look, we're not stealing talent, just giving another option, affiliate buttons and things like that. Or you kindly start messaging a couple of people, hey, I've seen your stuff, I like it. This is not a request to leave your current Fed, but if you've got extra time, I'm starting a Fed, I wouldn't mind you checking it out. That was the old way of doing it. And it took a lot to get to sort of where I got to, whereas after 2007, I haven't recruited actively since. I might have occasionally thrown in oh, hey, you look interesting, come to our place, because I'd seen the person's name and I've wanted them in my Fed for one reason or another. They were a free agent on Rough Cut or something. But for the most part, that's what a lot of it you sort of dream for, is just, can you get to a point where enough people have been in the Fed that you have a decent enough reputation that people will give it a shot. And that's sort of where Twitter also helps, because a good reputation can go a long way in this game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's where, I mean, the people that, I mean, let's be real, the people that are probably going to be listening to this are the people that are around our inner circle. And
Yes.
and we all know that you're of that caliber of Fed head that a lot of people may think they are, but can't quite achieve the true subjectiveness or objectiveness, I guess is the right word.
Yeah, subjectiveness just means you just really like
Well, no, but it's one of those, you really like certain people, but you're still objective, because that's what I'm curious about. You can tell when there's a character that you really like. You don't necessarily like make them shine, but you can tell that you're really having fun with it. But you still have the objectivity to make sure that it's not, they're not getting that what everybody perceives as favoritism.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is when you're more invested in something and you're more entertained by something, it tends to come across in the same length of a segment versus the same length of something. You're just like, yeah, I'm putting this together to put it together.
Yep. And again, sometimes things just click. And like, there's certain characters that, again, like, this is where I sort of go to one of the issues is that, okay, how much can you sort of have a unique character at this point? And a lot of it is just, if something stands out in a positive or different way, I then have a whole new avenue of options to do it. Sometimes it just clicks. I take Ace Marshall as a great example. It was more just last year, I was just, okay, what ridiculous thing can I come up with? And the handler was okay with me enough to basically say, you do whatever you want to do. Perfect. I just basically came up with random ideas. Sometimes worked on a week, and sometimes didn't, but that's just the way it goes. I think what it really comes down to is, in terms of this not favoring one person over another, and I think this is what every Fed owner should remember, is sort of the one, if anyone's ever starting a Fed, besides reminding them how much time it takes, the first thing I would say is remember that no one is ever contractually obligated to stay. Because basically everybody is taking their time and saying that the Fed that I am in is worth me putting my time into. So they're getting something out of it. Either it's because they have a show, it might be as simple as they just have a showcase to ply their craft, so to speak, or they got some really good angles, or hey, you've been treated really well, or there's some really cool stories, or it's just a lot of fun, or I just enjoy writing, or I know it's going to be fair, or whatever. You're building up loyalty. The only loyalty that people have in this game, besides to fellow handlers, friends they've always run with, is to the Fed based off how they've been treated by it. If they don't like it, they can leave. So my job as a Fed owner at its core is not putting out amazing shows. It's not making sure shows are up on time. It's not making sure I have great updates. It's not even saying, okay, I have great angles. It's, am I making the overwhelming majority of my roster happy more on average than not? Because if they're not happy, they don't have any reason to stay. They might stick around a little bit because either it's comfort, or, you know what, they might just, you're having an off month. But at the end of the day, you need to give the majority of people something they can hang their hat on and say, I know why I'm here. And that's what I think a lot of Fed owners forget. And that's why it's like, you see, for example, we can all probably know horror stories back in the day of people who, you were in a Fed where they basically helped all their friends get all the titles and whatever. Well, the reason they're doing that is because they're more worried about keeping their friends happy than making sure that the Fed's happy, which if all of them on the same team, that shouldn't be an issue. Or vice versa. And that's usually what sort of happens is, that's why I also say to people, SCW may not be for you. Try it out. If it's not for you, there's no hard feelings. It's in everyone's best interest if you're then not just hating yourself for being in the Fed. That's why the great thing about the game now is that there are a lot of different types of Feds out there, so you can find what you want. It's one reason I love putting Feds on the affiliates. If I don't give you what you want, one of them may. And at the heart, it comes down to that same sort of equation. Are you getting what you want out of the game for the handler and for the Fed owner? Are you giving all your handlers what they want out of the game? And you're not going to please all of them, but you have to please the majority of them. So,
yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I one thing, just I guess, going back to the characters and the angles, there's things I've always wanted to know about you.
uh-oh.
We're going there. Get ready. What has always stood out in your mind as one of your favorite moments, favorite angles, favorite characters? Not necessarily from a role-playing standpoint, but from you writing it, thinking that it gave you a lot of freedom to create from your end.
The problem is I'd have to answer that a couple of different ways, because there's two main angles that I would say still, well, there's three actually. I should include the other one, because if I don't, that one I just did things that drove all of you nuts. The first one was the Mercenaries against, basically, when the Mercenaries came in, and it was against CHBK, I think Jason Zero, Vixen, Starr, and Jay Gold, and I think Sid Turner was involved in it as well. The Mercs came in, and one really good guys, in the sense they all just sort of, they wanted to have fun, and they only had about an 8-month run as a whole. But they basically, I let them do one angle, and from that one angle, I then took it over from there, and it led basically for the next 8 months all of the major angles. And it was the first time that I felt, it was the first time I actually planned out an entire show start to finish. I want to say September 9th, 2004 is the show. And it basically was the first time that I started to have actual storylines that made sense, that led to the next pay-per-view, and you could see where it all started to come together. It was the first time that I sort of went to that level. The second one is the Damian Angel, Chad Evans feud, whereas God versus the Devil, and the Devil was the face. Where I just basically, they didn't know what I was going to do next, and there was like, I had one angle where, because the real speed was Chad Evans' Messiah, his messenger. And so Damian Angel basically with steel brackets pinned him to the side of the stage, essentially crucifying him without actually crucifying him. And like, I was able to have some fun with imagery, and they basically just let me go. And had a lot of fun. That I think is, in terms of the pure content of the angle, the best angle I've ever done. And then finally we come down to sort of the one where I think is my last great angle, which is sort of sad when this is now 8 years later, was the, 7 years later, the rise of Dark Fantasy into Infamous and the feud with the Brotherhood. One, because I didn't have, there were some like really weird variations. Some people had to leave for one reason or another, and came back, and yet it still all worked. It clicked. People just had fun with it, and I think that's still my last great angle. Because I've had times where I've had one good angle and the follow up just eventually just dies, and things like that. But that was also where I basically was at a point where I had the time to put in to really come up with some interesting things, and for the most part, I just did whatever I felt worked, and it led to some interesting things, including some interesting and well done heel turns that maybe some people in this chat may not agree with, but I liked it, and it was sort of the last time I really felt that, okay, I've got the entire angle start to finish figured out, before I had even done most of it.
And I want to put a little disclaimer in there that neither Wasley nor I asked him to say anything nice about us prior to us beginning this recording.
No, I actually asked him before we actually got on Skype to give you as much shit as he could. So the fact that he's giving you compliments means he's not getting his 10 Canadian.
Darn. Well, no, but like, I also still think 2009, 2010 was the last time I was really locked in. And it was also just,
that was
again,
a fun couple of years.
It was, and a lot of it came down to one simple thing, and had nothing to do with even the quality of the people there, because I think right now we have better writers. It has everything to do with everybody sort of had their own role and no one stepped over it. So everyone stood out. So I could do something with everyone. And I didn't have to, like, it was just mad, like, it just, everything clicked. Whereas I think one of the issues right now, and it's, I think, I can't speak for other feds, but just from what I see, is there's a lot of tendency to, even more so than I've noticed in the past, because even though there were still the Edge ripoffs and the Randy Orton ripoffs and the prior to that, I'm trying to think of who else was the other. It's more just those two, I think, and occasionally some Abyss ripoffs.
What about an HBK ripoff?
That's never happened in the game ever, at all. But
I couldn't resist.
No, but what it like now, I think a lot of people are very much okay. I saw this character, I'm going to do it, and I'm just like, that's great and all, but okay, that's just part of your character. That might be the core, but where's everything else? What's the wrapping it's in? And the issue we're running into now, and at least I see this in the feds that I sort of follow, there are a lot of similarities between characters. It's where we're regressing almost to a mean, and I don't mean that as an insult. It's more that I think we've gotten to a point where people have figured out, and this is just a natural of everything, is once you figure out what works, you don't want to change it, and I get that. 2009, 2010, I had a lot of people where I think, just throw stuff to the wall, let's see what happens. Because that year you had the rise of, say, like in SCW, Shiloh Valiant. You had the new Next Level. You had Jake Starr show up. Christian Saviors at his end. And the Infection storyline was there. Stacy Kissinger and Gable Winchester were a force. Infamous, obviously, coming out. Order of Chaos, Dark Fantasy, Graternity. All of these, and I list them all. None of them are similar in any way. They might have similar parts to them. But when you have a roster, and then I should mention, like, then you have the characters like Katie Stewart, Delusion, Rachel Fox. They're there as well. They all stand out because each individual person are different, and you can say this person's different than this person in these ways. Whereas now, and it partially because I'll frankly admit it, on the shows I have been struggling as what to find ways to differentiate, which doesn't help. Where there it just came naturally. Is it's easy to just bring them back to what is their core character and just stick with that. So, and I think right now we're seeing a lot of that in the game because I see the number of people who have Alexa Bliss pick bases or have the sort of have the standard gothic dark character, and it's even more so than I ever noticed before. And I think that's because, again, Twitter allows us to see so much more of the game than we ever did before. It's harder to stand out. And it's harder to be different. And so that's also why certain people you'll see on my shows where all of a sudden you're just like, that segment, you can tell I enjoyed writing it. It's because it's different. It's a new toy. I can play with this new toy in a different way than say some of the other stuff. And it's not that I don't care any less about anybody else in the Fed. It's just that one is immediately, okay, I'm playing the show. Hey, this would be a great angle. Like I'm doing this right now for the show that's on Wednesday. I have one thing where one new character, I already have their entire segments planned out. Start to finish, including actually, and so when somebody listens to this, they're going to find out that I'm not using their segment. I've pulled that segment out because it doesn't work with the new way I'm going, and it sort of just came to me as I was writing it, and I'm going to go that way because I like where it leads off to, and it was just because again, it's a different character that I don't have a history with, so I have a lot more options. This is also not me my way of saying okay, I only want new characters, but it means that older characters need to make sure they're evolving and not just sort of taking up that core, shining it up a different way and only just representing it. And that's sort of the problem with one of the things that I think from a handler perspective, a lot of people just need to be more aware of. It's easy to fall into a rut without realizing it, as all three of us would probably say that at some point it's happened. I know it's happened to me with shows. I'll say this, you read my shows, count the number of times per year I rely on somebody comes to the ring, somebody comes up, match made. Standard segment, I usually have it 2 or 3 times sometimes on a show. I've noticed this where I'm just like, I use the same segment over and over and over and over again. The content's different, but the general structure is identical.
But again, I mean, that just sort of follows on from what they do in real life pro wrestling.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, even in itself, that's still just a formula of the sport or the entertainment show, whatever you want to call it, that we are actually like using as the basis for the game.
Yep. It's like We're going to take your
yeah,
writing privileges away when all of a sudden you come out and talk about, we're going to make it a tag team match, player.
I've debated doing that actually on a show just
I would
for fun.
probably end up crying because I'd be laughing too hard.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, we've had several conversations in past where I've like dared you to do certain things, or like given you challenges where you have to include like certain phrases in shows and
lyrics from a song.
Yeah. Or
Like
just
C'est
really
la vie
fancy
from
words.
Bewitched. I worked that into a show.
Yeah, that is very true.
Yeah, there was one question
yeah,
that
so.
I don't remember exactly how Wasley was phrasing it, so I'll kind of defer to him. But it involved the to a degree the ongoing idea of sort of on camera, off camera reality versus kayfabe in as far as the game goes. But I can't remember exactly what it is, but I'm kind of pitch it over to him to kind of make it sound better.
Yeah, well, it basically comes more from a conversation that me and Doug have been having sort of on and off for the last like couple of weeks. And I know that we've sort of talked about it before on like the chat that we all go on. But there's this notion that obviously as wrestling fans, we all know that what we're watching is scripted. It's not real. But then when it comes to like e-fedding, it's as if everybody that plays the game has sort of like taken wrestling and put it into more of like a UFC or boxing setting where everything is meant to be real. And it just, I was kind of interested on how you felt about that view, because I know in the past you've said that you wished kayfabe were real in e-fedding because people just kind of ignore it in a way. But how does that affect when you're trying to make sure that your shows are realistic? Because I know that realism is a big thing for you. And it must be so hard to come up with storylines and segments knowing that you have to sort of stick to realism, but also acknowledge the fact that most people ignore kayfabe.
Yeah. Well, and that's why it's like I sort of use two tenets. One, it's wrestling, which sounds like a bad cop out, but it's true. It's because there's been angles done. Like the one of the famous ones is sort of when somebody gets run over in the parking lot. Mm-hmm. Okay, in real life they'd be arrested for vehicular manslaughter, and that's the end of their career. In wrestling, that's just normal. And one of the things I sort of use is especially if it's something that's really personal, very violent or very intense or whatever, where, okay, realistically, probably police should be brought in, is, well, if we don't bring the police in, I can get my own personal justice in the ring. Mm-hmm. Because you can get away with more. And that's where then, well, are you really, like, I play it with this whole thing about kayfabe is sell the angle. That's all I ask when I say with kayfabe. Is sell the angle, and this like at least for that other thing of, like I look at the reason I got rid of the Underground Championship was I just got to a point of like, okay, so when do I just have a flat out murder on the show? Mm-hmm. Because again, it gets to a point of there's only so much you can do before, and that's one reason I'll specifically name at least one character. Is the Red Rain issue was I got to a point it's like, what the hell else do I do with the character? There's nothing left to do because it's without murder. Mm-hmm. Because you get to a point where if you keep moving the goalposts in terms of how violent or how intense, you either need to have a cooling off period, which is one of the reasons I didn't, and one of the reasons I'm doing things as I am now, where I try to very much limit how much violence happens on the show, or you've got to get to the point where you literally throw reality out the window and say, F it, we're going to just go crazy. People are going to explode, and it'll be like when, what's it called? McGruber showed up on Raw, and R-Truth should be dead, but he's not. Because he exploded on the stage or some damn thing. I forget. It was several years ago, and I'd like to forget that show. But anyways, except for the Jericho song. Anyways. But that, so for me, it's like sell the angle. And I think when I talk about kayfabe is, one, sell the angle. Two, for the love of God, it's great that everyone's friends with everyone, but if someone's a massive heel and someone's a massive face, if I'm a fan, you're either taking me out of the angle or you're turning heel. Because you're still. So it's one of those things where you have maybe an off comment. That's one thing. But when you're like bestest buddies and things, I go to, okay, I now have to work that somehow into the show to at least either explain it away or to add an extra layer of depth, which again is something we wish we had in wrestling sometimes, because then again you can have some shades of gray if they're explained well and you can get around it. But with regards to, okay, what's happening in the ring, I think from a pure writing perspective, it's easier for a lot of people to just go, okay, this is actually all happening. We are beating the crap out of each other in the ring. Because then you can always have those scenes where this match is taking a lot out of me. It's personal. It's things like this. And you can have those scenes and they don't feel hollow because you're sort of just, well, are they really that or are they not? They're more there. At the same time, this is not to say that years ago I was trying to do DVDs where you had sort of the retrospective DVDs of somebody's career, and we've treated it as there's all respect for everyone. And at the very least, even if they might be still hitting each other, there's a respect. They learn from each other. They don't actually all hate each other, but they do hate each other. Sort of this weird, hackneyed, modern style of kayfabe, where it's almost like UFC, where at the end of the day, they probably all respect each other because they're all fighters. But they're still going to beat the crap out of each other because they want to win the money and win the belts. And at the same time, I don't see any issue if, say, somebody came in and said, you know what, we're not all hitting each other and all of this. The only issue there is, again, if they then start going on Twitter and saying, oh, look, I'm hanging out with my bestest buddy, the guy I'm feuding with, I'm going to take issue with that. Because, again, this is where I think even modern wrestling, there's a problem. Yes, we all realize it's fake and blah, blah, blah. But when you see a picture of Roman Reigns hanging out with Braun Strowman on a European trip, and I get they're friends and fantastic and great that they're friends, which means that they probably work really well and which is shown in their feud and great. Don't post that on the internet. Just like, it's one of those things, if a fan happens to catch you, fine, it happens. But don't be doing it yourself, and promoting it or things like this, because then you're just taking us out of the moment. We all know you're friends, and just like we all know that the person who played Darth Vader and Mark Hamill didn't hate each other. Well, I assume. I'm not sure. I don't know my background of backstage, but my point is that you're defending your business, because again, if people bought into wrestling more people would make money, and that's sort of my logic. If this is all real, let's just assume this is a real company and I actually am making millions of dollars and far less destitute than I actually am. I would want to protect the business, which is the angle, because if people have bought into the angle, great. That's what's going to cause people to, you know what, I want to see the person win or whatever. It's not because, they're a great wrestler, a really nice guy, or look what he did for Make-A-Wish. It's, he punched that person's he knocked him out backstage or something. You get invested, and I think that's one that modern wrestling misses, but also helps in e-fetting, because again, it just means everyone can write better stories.
And I guess playing off of that idea of people not buying into the angle, what else frustrates you, honestly, about the game?
Twitter in general. I only say this because Twitter is great, and Twitter is great for advertising. It's great for getting the word out. It's great for creating a community, and it can be great for forwarding angles if everyone's on the same page, or even if they're not on the same page, but at least realize, okay, I hate this person, let's do this. Or to promote something as a big deal. If someone's won their first title, they can post a picture. There's some feds who do a fantastic job with that, and I love seeing it. Where it bothers me is, again, Twitter is Twitter has taken what used to be, for those of us that have been in the game since the dawn of time, when you would have a thread that would have multiple replies in a role play thread where they'd all be like a paragraph. So you'd have a response in role play form. And you do a quick promo. Oh, yes, I will challenge. I want to challenge you to this match. And yes, I will face this, but only if you put your left knee pad on the line, because I want to sell it on eBay and make lots of money or whatever. And you have that. It's now on Twitter. So the problem is two things. One, it's 140 characters, so it's really easy to miss meeting. Two, you don't have... When you're role playing, you're forced to put yourself in the role play mindset because you're writing the role play. So yes, they walk into the room, the colors of the wall are green, whatever. And then I looked into the camera and said, I hate Skittles, and left.
Are you reading one of my role plays? Because that sounds an awful lot like my stuff.
Then I might tell you something. But yeah, you'd have that, whereas Twitter takes all of that away, so you can have reaction immediately, which is great, because I love reaction. Reaction is usually what then makes things feel more real, and you can have a much better response. It's one reason I'd like to keep people in the dark when I do my angles. But you then have situations where people, you're sort of reading response, and you're going, is that the character or the handler? Because the character, you could sort of, for me, I read everybody's role plays. So while I'm not the one writing it, I'm very familiar with most people's characters. And I get to a point where there's some people you can tell it's just they don't want to, that person is starting to get to a point where they're getting really riled up because they're getting into character, but they're forgetting to be their character. So they start to like try, so they're running with it, and this happens to a lot of people. It's happened to myself where I've had to remind myself, I'm a heel announcer when I'm being Jonathan Knotts, for example. I'm a heel announcer. I can't actually respond to that. That's why I'll delete the tweet and back off. But that's one of the things that Twitter does is it actually removes a filter, and it leads to some people making snap judgments that I think hurt their characters sometimes. At the same time, one of the other issues with Twitter is, as much as it is great for sharing sort of how good a Fed is, it's also really good to destroy people's reputations. And this is one reason why it's like I find that the Feds that are right now that I've been watching are either Feds that have really good buzz for a few months and then go on hiatus, or Feds that have been around since the dawn of time. The Feds in the middle are the ones that I'm most worried about, because like I see this forever, at least once or twice every couple of days, somebody is talking about how this Fed did this, X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And I saw somebody retweeted a tweet that talked about how Twitter has increased transparency, which is great. And it's accurate. But at the same time, it also has removed what was, if a Fed screws up, like I look at my early years, the first 6 months. If Twitter existed, then SW would not be around. I would have just said F it. Because I did a lot of really stupid things because I was learning. I didn't know. And you have a lot of people who go into Fed owning not knowing. Yes, you get some people who are just horrible, horrible, horrible managers, or horrible, horrible people in terms of they just want to get their friends over and have fun with that and whatever. But you also have this point where somebody's reputation can dog them forever and actually remove them from the game and hurt the game. Whereas back in the day, you had people post on Rough Cut or Accident, look out for this person, they're a flake or whatever. And I look at SCW, and I can name in the history of SCW 20 people, 30 people that had some sort of a negative reputation when they walked in and turned out to be fantastic additions to the Fed. People grow up, people change, people learn. I think the problem with Twitter is that if someone's pissed off, they can immediately put it out there, put OOC in front of it, and people run with it, especially if they've got more followers or they've got a good contact with the Fed, where instead of going, okay, if the Fed's badly run, they deserve to be called out. If the Fed is not looking to change their ways, they deserve to be called out. But if it's someone who frankly just doesn't know, sometimes it just needs someone to mentor them and say, here's what you need to be doing, kid. It'll be okay, because that's what ended up happening to me. Is for a few months I had to teach myself, and then Adam was the one who sort of said, you might want to do this and do this and do this, and you'll probably do better off. And it took me about 6 months, but then once I hit the first rise to greatness, I started to do well, and then I started to figure things out, and I'd learned, okay, what can I do, what can't I do, what's not considered proper. And I think Twitter has stripped some of that away, where some people who are really good in the game are getting either scared off or quickly getting tarred with a brush, and that prevents them from really enjoying the game. It's one of those sort of double-edged swords. It's like the comment section in any news article. There might be some great points made, but you really don't want to be spending too much time in there sometimes.
Now my question to you is it? I know it was like that when Twitter first started getting kind of utilized by the eFed community. Lately, it seemed like that's kind of, I mean, at least from my feeds, I haven't seen as much of people seeming to cross over or not have that barrier. I mean, I was one of the most guilty people of not knowing how to stay in character, and it became one of the things that pissed a lot of people off about me. I mean, I've wised up enough and had enough people talk to me about it to where I've learned from that mistake. But it seems like that's gotten a little better, because I mean, I know from, I mean, this is just my personal experience when I lost at Fatal Fortunes and I get a tweet about losing and I respond as saying, you know what, the better person won, and I move on, and literally the response is, I didn't know I was going to get that response. Yeah. So it's kind of, from what I've seen, it seems like that's starting to get curtailed, or people are starting to kind of get their feet under them of how to use Twitter with the game more.
It's far less damaging than it once was, even a few years ago. It's more that you see the human element come into play, and that's the only issue with Twitter, is why, like, I sort of, whenever I hop onto Jonathan Knott's, I either play one of two roles. One, I'm just screwing around. And I sort of give myself 5 tweets to screw around, and then I go back to whatever I'm doing. So I don't just spend my entire night on Twitter. Or the other one is if I see somebody that he's sort of friends with, it's to more just pull them back and just say, okay, you're fine, but you might be going a little bit too hard here. Because again, the thing about Twitter is it's usually not intentional. It usually is not intentional. It's how it looks in the sense of you can write something that seems completely neutral, and all of a sudden someone reads it and it sounds like you're basically threatening to murder your opponent at whatever. And it comes down,
or you're burying them like I used to do a lot.
Yeah, and it's not through intention. It's just that's how it comes out. Or the other one is that you get some people who, again, they just get into the character and they just start having too much fun with it. And so they're tweeting back and forth for 13 straight hours, which is great and all, except for then I have the other problem, which is, for the love of God, put it in a role play. Use it to your advantage.
That's one of my biggest issues with Twitter. That there's people that will use Twitter to play out a scenario that could have been a phenomenal CD piece.
Well, and that's the other thing is I also just laugh about people using Twitter to like have conversations a normal person would have over the phone or in text message. Like,
but I will say this: I have done that on purpose many times. Like me and Pete used to, with Autumn and Watson, used to do that on purpose just to annoy people. Yeah. So sometimes it is done intentionally.
Oh yeah, like again, if it's intentional, fantastic. It's just it's like things like that where I'm just like, it comes down to where Twitter. I should probably phrase it this way so I don't get too many people angry and thinking I'm now just burying a whole bunch of people, which I'm not. But the best way to put it would be, Twitter has removed that layer of a filter that had when you used to have to post that role play that was a response, as opposed to Twitter where you can immediately respond. Twitter, it's a lot easier to just go and do it. And yes, you can delete it later, but really everybody's still seen it and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. It's where, because you can immediately do it, you sometimes will just do it not realizing, wait a minute, if I'd taken 5 minutes and thought this through a bit better, I could get more out of it. Or I could frame it a different way, or I could set up a role play or whatever. And I think that's sort of the problem is because at the end of the day, Twitter is a net good because, again, more people care about their characters, get involved. You can promote the game a lot better and things like that. There's a few negatives that I think if people can figure out how to curb them on a general basis, I'm not mentioning anyone in particular because all of us, including myself, have sometimes had this issue. Is you can usually have then better role plays, which means you're not struggling for content, which means you're enjoying the game, and things like that. Which probably should get me to one of the other sort of pet peeves I have in the game, if we want another one that has nothing to do with Twitter, but is related to role playing. And that's that every role play needs to be a home run. A good Fed owner will not care if you hit a home run every time. A bad Fed owner will only make a decision based off your last role play. I look at trends personally. If I put you in a match and you role play and great, you had a bad week, so it's not the best stuff. So it's a status quo role play that just sort of keeps things where they are. Great. You're showing consistency. That to me is more valuable than anything else. At the same time, it's just like the number of people who, but one of the things is, and this is a pet peeve on myself here, is that my shows are getting up late because I, again, have limited time. So if I don't get a head start, I quickly fall behind. And I've had times where I've had the card up for 2 weeks. Oh, I can't role play for the match anymore. The show was up too late. And meanwhile, like the deadline is Wednesday and the show was up Friday, and I'm going, so you need 5 days to, 1, read the show. 2, in addition to the already 10 days you've had the card, to come up with any content. Probably stop role playing at the last minute then and be my next response. But it comes down to, I think a lot of people want to have this perfect role play because they're worried that if they lose one match, it's the end of the world. And again, if you've been in a bad Fed, unfortunately, that happens to be the case. A good Fed owner will look at, what are you doing for the Fed as a whole? Are you showing up for your matches? Generally speaking, when you role play, are you putting out decent quality? And I'm not talking, this is the greatest role plays I've ever read. If I role play, do I know that the matches at least can be competitive? Because that's what should be the main baseline for any title match. If I put these two people together, are they going to have at least a match where it's not a foregone conclusion who wins? If that's the case, that match shouldn't be happening. Unless it's sort of it's your nod to somebody who's been around and who's trying hard or whatever, they might be struggling. Then you can give them the match as sort of a look, have fun with it. This is a sort of thank you for being a good person in the Fed type of thing. Then that's fine. But I think a lot of people get too focused on I need to hit this home run. And it's like watching, I'll put it this way, I'm watching the Jays game right now, and they're actually winning for once, so fantastic. But there's a point there where they got criticized heavily because there were a lot of power hitters. Well, if they're all trying to straight hit for home runs and none of them are hitting well, you're not going to hit home runs. You might only hit one home run. It's the same type of logic. Is you usually then just put yourself in a deeper rut and then start to not enjoy the game. Whereas if you just enjoy on telling a good story and showcasing your character and having fun with whatever you have, the angle you have, the Fed itself, the people you work with in the Fed, you can get so much more out of the game, along with still having that competitive aspect, because I understand that's there for some people. But you don't have to hit the home run, basically.
Yeah, and for anyone out there who's listening to this and looking for one honest piece of advice, when Olek's told me that how many times? Countless. I mean, because I
just copy and paste the message.
I know. I mean, that as much of a joke as that may be, there could be a lot of truth to it, because I was one to constantly be, and I mean, I still like criticism. I still like knowing what I've done right and wrong. But at the same time, if I write a role play that just kind of keeps my story going, I'm happy with it. I don't feel like it has to be the best thing. Like I'll say, like, I mean, Olek, you and I've talked about kind of what ideas I've had for the trios, and I know that I have to have some. I know I have to hit a home run on that one if what I want to do really happens. So it's one of those. I've thought ahead to, okay, how do I get to what I want to use there as what I think would be a home run arc there, but not make it just complete trash beforehand, but just kind of gradually move forward.
See, it helps to sort of think of it as like a book. So with like each scene, especially if you've got like a longer arc that you've got several role players worth of material in, when you're reading
that implies I read.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised that you can even string a sentence together. But think about a book. I mean, when you're reading a fiction book, not every single chapter in that book is the most edge of your seat, exciting chapter you have ever read in a book, because sometimes you need a sensible, calm chapter to set something else up. So you've got to think, especially if you're building to something that is going to be a massive, massive piece of CD. Yeah, so you've got a big match coming up, but you need to get to that point. Then you just go whichever way you have to go.
And I can imagine for Olek it'd be tiring if you had to read home runs every card and try to decide on two legit stellar role plays every card. How tiring that would be on you.
Well, it is one, because I have to then actually make a decision. And the thing is that when people always try to hit a home run, they become vested in their work, and I get it. And so I also then have to do the extra thing of, well, why did you like their role play better? Sometimes, and this is not the sexy answer, sometimes you just read two role plays and one you prefer.
Yeah.
And I try to do my best and I'll let my tastes become it, but sometimes that's just what comes down. I prefer the story better. I thought it was better executed. I can't be like, well, this sentence is written this way. I can't do that. But it comes to like, and another way to look at it would be if you take the shows that I write. If I have every single major, like let's just say I have 6 angles a month, which is probably also light, but 6 angles a month. If every one of those angles has a massive blowaway angle every single show, 1, I just burn through ideas. 2, none of it stands out. You need to have those role plays where nothing happens sometimes, or very little happens, or you're setting things up. So when you have that climax, it matters. And like it's the same thing as where if you start just burning through it wherever some ridiculous over the top everything is happening every single role play, at some point it catches up to you, because then I stop caring. One of the most overused tropes I think in Fetting right now is I've lost a major match, which seems to happen now, which for some characters can happen every couple of months. I think I might retire. And like I've seen in the last 2 years 5 separate handlers use it.
Guilty.
And I'm just like, okay, great. Either make it your own or just tell me you want to lose the match. because at the end of the day, it's one of those where it's great that you're making the match mean something, but make it your own. It's like you want to have this ridiculous over the top. Sometimes it's just like, okay, that stung, and you like. I one of my favorite role plays I wrote when I used to actually care about role playing and like role playing was the role play I wrote for CHBK against Xander Valentine. And the match, I knew how it was going to end because I'd already decided with Adam how it was going to end, which was it was going to end with him hitting his tiger driver off the top rope and intentionally aim for his neck. And it was going to injure him for a few months because I was just like, I can't role play as regularly as I'd like to. But I wrote the role play with him. Basically, the entire role play was him pouring a glass of scotch and thinking. Because he knew there was a good chance he was going to end up in the hospital after this match, no matter what happens. Because one, I was building up Xander Valentine as a massive, huge monster heel, where he was like destroying people. And it was a simple role play. I'm a big fan of simplicity done well. Sometimes the best role plays are things that have literally one thing happening and that's it. And I think content's one thing, pacing is just as important. And knowing when to step on the gas versus when to let off, one, for your own sanity, but two, just also to give the character a break. And I think the best advice I can give to people, especially in Feds where you're booked every show, is take a moment and evaluate the match. Is this a match that people are going to remember in 3 weeks? If not, don't put your A game out. Mm-hmm. And that sounds weird as a Fed owner, but it's more save your A game for the matches you care about. So it might be, because that way it's the type of thing is like, hey, you're facing off against Wrestler X. Well, Wrestler X is somebody you've always wanted to face, and you know what, you want to win that. Okay, then put your A game out. That's great. You have your own personal motivation. But if it's against somebody just to get you on the card to move a storyline forward or whatever, at the end of the day, what people are going to remember is the angle. They're not going to remember the match. As I sat there, if I sat there and said, name me who fought 3 weeks ago on Breakdown. Just name me any of the matches on the card. Could you?
Probably not.
No.
I can't, and I wrote it. I can tell you what angles happened, though. Because that's what it is. And it comes down to one of the great things that during the Attitude Era, Kevin Kelly said in a recent interview, they always tried to plan segment 1, 6, and whatever, it was the overrun. Because hook them at the start of the show, hook them when they're changing channels, and hut the go-home angle. Why? Because those are the 3 things people are going to remember. Same thing with any story arc. Focus on the big matches, focus on the stuff that you know people are going to be taking notice of or you want people to take notice of, and pace yourself. You'll get so much more of the game, and then you're not worrying about, okay, I don't have anything. You don't have anything. Okay, write a role play with them eating dinner with their family. Show some basic character development. Who cares if it works out good? You got something up. Because for me, the one thing is I'd always rather see someone be consistent than the greatest. Because consistent, I can work with. The greatest means at some point that runs dry. Because you can't be on top forever.
That's true. And I think both Wasley and I can vouch for that.
Mm-hmm.
You think it'd be easy. You think you can do it. You think, oh, I'm at my prime. I can knock it out. I can just take everyone on. And then you're up there for a little while, and it catches up to you.
The game evolves. So the thing is that at some point people catch up to what you're doing, and you can either then respond or take a break, or you go into sort of a dip down and you go, okay, well, this is not working for a bit, or you figure something out. There's been a few people who would have, if you looked at their entire run, they had 2 good runs in them, but they were around for 7 years. But for a 3-month period, 3-month periods, they were the best role player in the Fed. That's all they needed to do. And they still enjoyed running the character and things like this. And there's a few people that if you go back in SCW where you look at what they're doing, their role plays for the most part were average, but they would all of a sudden have it all click. And they'd come up with a run for it, and it would all work. And it would stand out, and it would be good. It's why sometimes some people come out of nowhere and have a couple of months and then go back and do nothing. It's writing. It's a skill-based thing, yes, so there's that. But it's at the same time, sometimes things click. You're the right character at the right time. If you win, right now, let's just look at what we have coming up, Taking Hold of the Flame. You need to write 1 or 2 good role plays, and you're in the main event. Then you need to write a 3rd good role play, and you're the world champion.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean you're the best role player in the Fed. It just means for a couple of matches you did really well. And at the same time, you only need, at most, 3-4 role plays to get there. You don't need 20. And it's one of the sort of exciting things about the game. It's also just a nature of it. Is even for me, I had to learn, you're going to have bad shows. It's one reason why I post it, make it clear if I don't like it, and then I move on. How do I salvage it? So it makes it so much easier when you're not focusing on every individual facet, because if you start to do that, that's when you start to hate the game.
And Olek, I know that we have a hard out, as they say, with you. So I got one final question for you, and then we'll wrap this all up. You've said in my tenure multiple times that there's going to come a point when you see SCW having to ride off into the sunset. Right now, where do you see SCW in the future?
One, getting better after what I would say is a very inconsistent period. Right now, I don't have any plans to close it. I see at least one more year. Right around this time, I usually get Rise to Greatness. I sit down and I look at myself and go, is this it? Do I have another year in me? Because I want to end it at Rise to Greatness. One, so it ends on an anniversary and it's just a nice, clean chapter and I can have some big blow-away fuse and whatever. But right now, I still think I have a year left in me. We'll see if that still holds true. But
do you try to just plan it like a year at a time? Do you say,
yes.
I have a year left in me, and then
yes,
evaluate each year?
Yes, and I have little things planned that once I make the decision, it's done. I will not be dissuaded from it, and people will know well in advance if I do choose to end it. It's more that I just choose out of respect to what I've accomplished, which sounds sort of somewhat arrogant, but it's more I take pride in what I've done. We're going to be on 14 years at the end of July, and I started literally with knowing nothing about the game. And if people enjoy what I'm doing, great. That's all I care about at the end of the day. But I want to also make sure that I give it a fitting close, because as I've said multiple times, this isn't where I'm going to be like, okay, so hand it off to somebody else. It closes, it's done.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that simply because I don't want to saddle anyone with the hell of running SCW, because I've run it by myself for so long and people have gotten used to it. And I have seen people who have tried to step in to help me out and basically get well, you're not him. And that's not fair. I'd rather somebody, if they really want to, they can test the roster. Hey, I'm starting a Fed over here. You're welcome to come along. I'll happily support that. But I've also decided that if I close, I'm never coming back. There will not be a reunion show. It's over. Basically, the moment I do that is I'm done with e-fetting. I'm retired. I don't judge another match. I don't write another match. I don't do anything. So that's part of the.
Do you really think you can ever get to that point where you're done?
I will be forced to, I think, because it'll come down to I just don't have time. When what I actually do involves so much writing, at some point I'm going to get to a point where I can't do it to the level I want, so therefore that'll be what decides it. Because I've thought about it. Do I want to just sort of soft close the Fed and reopen it as a minor indie Fed type of thing and give myself a different challenge? And I said I wouldn't be able to do it. Because I would drive myself nuts trying to make it still. It's like when people say, "Well, go to match summaries." I'm just like, I'd rather write the whole match. It's easier, as weird as that sounds. Because the summary, you have to figure out what are the main spots. Whereas the match, I usually just write it as I go. And okay, this works for a spot, and this is where this would naturally go. And okay, magically we have the match. For me, it's the segments that take the longest, actually, of all things, because I have to make sure I'm in the mindset of the characters. But I don't want to step back in that sense. I've done it this way for so long. I want to maintain this until the end, sort of as that's what it was. I want to maintain it at its peak and not bastardize it by doing, again, a half measure.
That is a very poetic and beautiful end to this interview. So, Olek, my friend, I thank you. Thank you for pouring your heart and soul of SCW out for us. It was It was beautiful. Brought tears to my eyes. You actually said
Man.
you said nice things about me. So how can I not like that?
Well, I say this because you can still edit the recording and make me sound like a complete fool. Although there's a few things I said that I'm sure we'll get some interesting comments. But
Well, I have a feeling we're going to end up having to do part 2 of this.
Oh yeah, because I think there's a lot
stuff.
we could expand on.
Yeah, like there's stuff that I wanted to touch on that like has kind of half come up along the way that I'm going to have to save for next time because of the hard cut off. But I think we're definitely going to end up doing the part 2 based on this.
well, I'm happy to do it if you will have me back. It's great to be a guest on this show. Big fan. And
How do you think I feel? I mean, I started off as being the one that were like the second person to be interviewed, and suddenly I've been roped in to be like co-host of this thing.
You roped yourself in. What are you talking about?
I did not rope myself in. You just messaged me a few days ago saying we're doing this. Do you want to be on board? I'm like, yeah, of course I want to be on board.
Don't throw me back under the bus here. But on that
it's so fun.
and on that note, I guess it's time to end. It sounds like there's going to be a round 2 with Olek, which will be fun. We can actually get into a little more stuff that we weren't able to get in the first time. At the same time, we got other Fed heads who have been anxiously awaiting their opportunity to drop some knowledge. So, for Wasley, for Olek, I am Jake Starr. This has been the Social Misfit Sit Down. Hopefully, I'll learn to talk by the next time. I'm out. We're out. Deuces.